Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. A sea of people march across the Brooklyn Bridge today to honor George Floyd's life. His brother says he hopes the Floyd name will spark change. The unarmed guardian angels are standing up to armed looters in New York City. The founder of the volunteer crime fighters group describes a showdown at Foot Locker. Hong Kong police arrested protesters after the annual Tiananmen Square massacre vigil today. The anniversary is especially sensitive this year as Beijing tries to rein in more control over the city. 31 years later, a Tiananmen Square massacre survivor recounts his experience and the glimmer of humanity he saw as tragedy struck.
If they fired bullets at me, I would die for sure because I was sitting on top of the monument's base.
And chaos erupts at an elementary school in China after a security guard injured dozens in a knife attack. Patrolling the streets of New York City to stop crime is routine for the Guardian Angels, but they've had some intense moments with looters in recent days. NTD's Miguel Moreno went out with the group to see how they're helping to hold down the city.
Wednesday was another day on patrol for the Guardian Angels, an unarmed volunteer safety patrol group in New York City. The nonprofit members faced off against looters recently.
They didn't even board it up.
Founder Curtis Lewa said he and 5 other volunteers held their ground in front of this Lower Manhattan Foot Locker the night before to keep looters out. Like many nights since 1979, the Guardian Angels went around the city trying to stop crime.
We noticed from afar there were guys who had already broken into the Foot Locker and were grabbing loot out. So we run down here, we smash them in. We grab their loot. We tell them ain't going nowhere. Up against the wall, all the loot. Okay, they had it stuffed everywhere. Down loot. And so they go running out. We'll be back. We'll be back. We'll be back. I knew they were coming back.
Sliwa said the group came back with 100 people carrying weapons and barged into the Foot Locker. He ended up getting hit with a ball-peen hammer which fractured his jaw, but he said they managed to push them out again. Incredibly, he said the looters came back a third time.
I said, guys, if they take us out and, we're room temperature, so be it. We cannot dishonor the Guardian Angels. We stand and we fight for what we know is right. And boy, the battle began, and they were getting us good. And somehow, some way, we were able to keep them out.
He said the police got involved eventually and the chaos stopped. This week, looters have hit Lower Manhattan and Midtown businesses, including the Macy's Herald Square store. The NYPD told us that at least 180 arrests were made citywide on Wednesday. On Monday, nearly 700. Sliwa said that the problem is they're being released immediately under this year's bail reform. Under the new policy, people must be released if charged with certain misdemeanors and violent felonies, burglary being one of them. But it seemed quiet in Lower Manhattan on Wednesday. Sliwa said enforcing the 8 p.m. curfew probably helped with that, but also a change in law enforcement.
What do you think made the difference?
Enforcing the curfew this time, definitely. And I think 11 o'clock last night, I noticed a change in attitude of the cops.
Yeah.
They were just coming in waves, and they were locking everybody up.
It's a sign of relief, but other members told us they're expecting crime to go up this weekend, and they'll be on patrol when it happens. Miguel Moreno, NTD News, New York.
Hong Kongers are especially sensitive this year as they remember the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. This year's vigil is meeting with a lot of firsts, including some arrests.
Hong Kong police arrested protesters Thursday after a candlelight vigil commemorating the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. Police banned this year's vigil, saying the gathering would violate emergency virus measures. Thousands of protesters defied the ban and showed up anyway.
Next year, we don't know what risks we'll face, so if we still have the option to come out today, then that's why I have.
This year marks the 31st anniversary of the massacre. This is the first time it's been banned in Hong Kong.
This has been going on for so many years. Now with this social distancing law, there's nothing you can do. Everything has been tightened. Everything has been ruined.
24-year-old Amelia Wong says they must overcome their fears in order to safeguard their rights.
We can't stop commemorating just because we are afraid or worried. We can only do it step by step. Try our best to safeguard our freedom to march and assemble, and try to remind the people around us, our next generation, and even the older generation, how unbearable our regime is.
Scuffles broke out after the rally when some demonstrators tried to set up roadblocks. It's the first time unrest broke out at the annual vigil. The Chinese regime has never given a full account of what happened in 1989. Experts place the casualties from that day anywhere from hundreds to 10,000 dead. This anniversary is especially sensitive to Hong Kongers. Beijing moved to rein in dissent with a new law there in May.
Over 30 years ago, this former Hong Kong student leader witnessed the massacre on Tiananmen Square. Now he recounts the most unforgettable moment, a glimpse of humanity among the tragedy. NTD's Juliet Song has more.
Kenneth Lam was 8 feet from armed Chinese troops when they started charging towards him.
If they fired bullets at me, I would die for sure because I was sitting on top of the monument's base.
He and fellow demonstrators were at Tiananmen Square asking the Chinese regime for democracy. Then as student leader, Lam was one of the few Hong Kongers present among the crowds of young students from the mainland. On the night of June 3rd, the regime sent tanks in. Troops fired gunshots into crowds of unarmed protesters. Lam recounts how, as the soldiers moved towards them, without a word, the Beijing students surrounded him with their bodies. They guided him away from the vase.
They were calling my name, Xiao Chang. Hong Kong people have done more than enough for us. You must go back alive and tell the world about all this.
The Beijing student protesters left Lam with a heavy heart.
As if I, as a Hong Konger, have the right to go back to Hong Kong to enjoy our freedom. But they have to continue to shoulder such heavy suffering.
After more than 30 years, still he can't forget.
They did not think about whether they would be shot by the soldiers. They only had a very humble request, and this humble request was for me to stay alive, go back and tell the world what happened in Beijing.
Lam says he feels the weight of his responsibility to them. Over the years, no matter how busy he has been with work, he's taken the time to speak at schools and community events so more people can know about what happened in the massacre. Reporting by Sarah Liang and Juliet Song, NTD News.
Facebook will start labeling Russian, Chinese, and other state-controlled media organizations. The social media giant will block ads from such outlets that target U.S. users. Russia's Sputnik, Iran's Press TV, and China's Xinhua News are all on the list that's receiving a state media label. U.S. news outlets will not be labeled. Facebook determined that even U.S. government-run organizations have editorial independence. Facebook acknowledges its failure to stop Russian use of its platforms to interfere in the 2016 U.S. presidential election. It announced broad plans last year to create the label. And now, some good news for small businesses. The Senate has passed a bill that would make it easier to use the Paycheck Protection Program and qualify for loan forgiveness.
The Senate passed the bipartisan Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act Wednesday night by unanimous consent.
The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
The measure gives businesses more time to use loan money under the Paycheck Protection Program, which was designed to help them during the virus pandemic. It extends the original 8 weeks businesses had to spend the loan money to qualify for forgiveness to 24 weeks. The bill also lowers how much of the money must be used to fund payroll from 75% down to 60%. Many small businesses asked for an extension. Some of the hardest hit businesses like restaurants, gyms, and movie theaters weren't able to use the funds because they couldn't reopen. Businesses will be able to use the money to pay utilities, wages, rent, and mortgage interest. The loans are an incentive for small businesses to keep employees on the payroll. The U.S. Small Business Administration is providing the loans. They have an interest rate of 1% and a maturity of 2 years. Only businesses with fewer than 500 employees can get one. The SBA says nearly 4.5 million PPP loans have been approved as of Tuesday. The loans total over $500 billion. An NFIB survey found that 77% of small business owners applied for a PPP loan. 93% were approved. The measure passed the House last week. It now needs President Trump's signature to become law.
Up next, an Indian app's popularity explodes thanks to its ability to detect and remove Chinese-made phone software. But now Google has removed it from the Play Store. Find out why when we return. As military tensions rise at the Indo-China border, a different kind of battle is already happening in cyberspace. A new popular app from India can detect and remove Chinese software from your device. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
Google has removed a new app from its Play Store, one that seeks out and removes Chinese-made software. Appropriately named Remove China app, it can detect and delete applications made by Chinese developers. Quickly rising in popularity, it clocked in at over 1 million downloads in less than 2 weeks and took the number 2 slot at the Google Play Store's list of top free apps in India. Chinese apps have made a huge splash in India despite rising tensions between the two countries. Software analytics company Sensor Tower estimated that social media app TikTok had reached 636 million downloads in India, far more than either Instagram or Snapchat. TikTok is owned by Beijing-based ByteDance. Bollywood actor Milind Soman wrote on Twitter that he uninstalled TikTok despite his 99,000-strong following. India's current anti-China sentiment stems from an ongoing border dispute and the rampant virus spread in India. According to a local survey institute, 2/3 of India's citizens believe that China should be responsible for the pandemic. That's as Chinese and Indian soldiers have been clashing at their shared border since May. Google removed the app earlier this week from its Play Store, citing a policy that bans Android apps that help delete or disable other apps. But even after the removal, the India-based developer shared a tip on his website. Users can still find the origin of software apps with the help of a quick Google search. It explained that typing app name, origin, country should do the trick. Now to China. A new Communist Party secretary in Mudanjiang City has been appointed after new virus cases popped up locally almost every day within the last week. At the same time, the new secretary also became the new leader of a group working to combat the pandemic in that city. Local media didn't elaborate on the decision, but as a general rule, if the virus situation in a specific place becomes too overwhelming, local leadership may be replaced. According to local reports, Mudanjiang has discovered 15 asymptomatic cases in the last week alone. But the information available on social media shows the situation could be much worse. Early this week, the city began an initiative to test all of its 2.5 million residents for the CCP virus. The decision came from the city's new authorities.
An elementary school guard in China injured 39 people in a knife attack today. Children were among those hurt.
37 children were injured and 2 adults sustained severe wounds in Thursday's knife attack on an elementary school in China. Video footage shows children being carried out of the school and rows of ambulances outside. The attacker was a security guard at the school, which teaches children between 6 and 12 years of age. China has seen several attacks on school children in recent years. 8 were killed in a similar attack in Hubei province last year. Thursday's attack happened in Sangwu County in the southern province of Guangxi. Most civilians aren't allowed to own guns in China, but attackers have used other weapons like bombs and axes, as well as hammers and knives.
UK banks HSBC and Standard Chartered are drawing criticism today. They're openly backing a new law in Hong Kong that gives sweeping powers to the Chinese Communist Party. Our UK correspondent Jane Werrell has the details.
Europe's biggest bank is supporting a repressive new law. HSBC's senior boss in Asia on Wednesday signed a petition posted on social media, along with a statement saying Beijing's so-called national security law would stabilise Hong Kong's social order. UK-based Standard Chartered also chimed in, later saying it thought the law would bring stability to Hong Kong. Both banks, which are headquartered in London, came under pressure to back the new law. Their moves were likely motivated by an effort to protect their business interests in Hong Kong, their single biggest market. Their decision is at odds with the US and UK governments, which have both spoken out against the proposed law. Conservative lawmaker Neil O'Brien said on Twitter that HSBC is backing Beijing's repressive new security laws designed to snuff out freedom in Hong Kong. He added that other banks are available. The chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee also questioned why the two banks chose to back an authoritarian state's repression of liberties. Democracy campaigners fear the law will bring communist censorship to Hong Kong. Prime Minister Boris Johnson said Britain will not walk away from the people of Hong Kong, confirming on Wednesday he would extend visa rights to Hong Kong citizens eligible for a BNO passport. It means about 2.9 million could stay in the UK without a visa for up to 12 months. The HSBC announcement was brought up by British lawmakers during a Thursday debate. The Human Rights Minister wouldn't comment on it specifically, but he did reiterate that he hopes that China will think again before enacting this law in Hong Kong. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
Coming up, American Airlines announces its flight bookings for July. The report might surprise you. We have the details after the break. Were flying high today as it announced major flight increases for next month. It's a sign travelers are returning sooner than expected as shelter-in-place orders across the nation loosen.
American Airlines will boost flights by 74% in July, a sign of a potential comeback by the airline industry. Busy days for American next month will see around 4,000 flights, up from 2,300 last month. Travelers vanish from airports during the CCP virus pandemic. American reported a 15% average occupancy rate per plane in April. That figure rebounded to 55% last week. Investors were encouraged by the news. The company's stock rose almost 40% on Thursday, leading the S&P 500. Several other airlines were among the day's top 10 performers. American believes people are hungry to get traveling again, and it feels confident about flying a bigger July. The airline will bring back some of the 450 jets it parked during the worst of the collapse in flying. But while demand has improved on domestic flights, international flights lag far behind, flying less than 20% than last year. American says confusion over travel bans and tourist attraction closures added to the sluggish recovery. Passengers will be glad to see the airline's club lounges reopen late June. This comes after improvements to encourage social distancing and prevention of the CCP virus.
Russian President Vladimir Putin criticized a bungled response to a fuel spill in a remote Arctic region before declaring a state of emergency in the area. A fuel tank lost pressure, releasing more than 20,000 tons of oil.
Russian President Vladimir Putin approved a state of emergency in the Arctic city of Norilsk on Wednesday after a huge leak of fuel into a river. He then went on television to admonish a senior official for what he called a bungled state response. Officials found a fuel tank at a power station owned by a subsidiary of Norilsk Nickel Company, lost pressure in the remote industrial region last Friday, and released 20,000 tons of fuel and lubricants, much of which flowed into the river Ambarnaya. In the TV address, Putin expressed his shock at finding out that local authorities had only learned of the incident from social media 2 days after it happened. The state environment watchdog said the river and the surrounding subsoil had been severely affected. The state fisheries agency says the river will need decades to recover. Putin said he supported a proposal to declare a national state of emergency in the area as it would help the cleanup. Norilsk Nickel is the world's leading nickel and palladium producer and said it's doing all it can to clear up the spill and has brought in specialists from Moscow to assist them.
In our business roundup, almost 2 million Americans filed for unemployment last week, but that's fewer than the week before. The White House narrows its search for a virus vaccine to 5 companies, and AMC Theaters says it may go out of business.
1.8 million Americans filed for unemployment last week. That makes over 42 million since the shutdown began in mid-March. But it's the first time since the pandemic began that less than 2 million people signed on in 1 week. AMC Theaters said it has substantial doubt it can remain in business in its current state. The theater chain says it currently has enough money to reopen this summer or later, but is not sure beyond that. Right now, the company says it's basically not making any money. South Korean prosecutors have requested an arrest warrant against Samsung Group heir J.Y. Lee. It follows an investigation of a controversial 2015 merger and alleged accounting fraud. The move spells fresh trouble for Lee, who, if arrested, faces a return to jail just over 2 years after being released in February 2018. According to the New York Times, the Trump administration has chosen 5 candidates that are most likely to produce a virus vaccine. The companies are Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Merck, and Pfizer. The 5 will reportedly get access to additional government funds, help in running clinical trials, and other support.
Coming up, a mountain lion finds its way into the garage of a Colorado homeowner. See photos posted by wildlife officials after the break. Thing you don't want to find waiting for you as you head for your car. Colorado Parks and Wildlife posted these photos on Twitter. Look closely under the SUV. That's a mountain lion hiding under the vehicle. It was found in an open garage in the city of Longmont. Wildlife officials were called out and safely tranquilized the wild animal. They released him back into the mountains as in a remote area of the National Forest. And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.